You're listening to What She Said, a podcast for creatives and new bloggers hosted by me, Lucy Sharif, a freelance journalist and blogger living in this episode, I chat to Hannah Witton, who is a YouTuber. She's a blogger. She's written a book and done live comedy shows, so she's pretty epic, and she lives just up the road from me, so I was very lucky enough to have her come over to my flat one day in April, when I was still pregnant, which is why we sometimes refer to me being pregnant, if that confuses you. It was just before she did her live shows. We had a chat about blogging, about the YouTube world, about her journey to where she is now, and she's got some really, really interesting things to say about being a role model, and she's just generally a really interesting person. So I hope you really, really enjoy it. As ever, I've linked to all the things that we discussed in the show notes. Enjoy. Do you want to talk a little bit about how, when, why you started your YouTube channel, and then talk a little bit about your blog as well?
Yeah, sure. So I started my YouTube channel in April 2011. Wow, so it'll be like 6 years ago. And
so you were super young then, weren't you?
I was 19. Yeah, and not as young as some people who are starting YouTube now, but yeah.
It is quite young.
It was like a long time ago. The longest hobby I think I've ever kept. But I basically started because for a few months up until then, I'd been watching a lot of YouTube, and I just really loved watching vloggers and getting into the community. And to me, it seemed like all of these people that I enjoyed watching the videos of were all friends. Yeah. And I was like, I want to be friends with them. And so I was just like, I'll start making videos. And then what happened is that I made friends who were also kind of like at my level, like very small, starting out. And we would all like watch each other's videos, and we'd like spend like hours on Skype together because like everyone's like in different parts of the world.
So you built quite a community then, quite early on.
Yeah, it was definitely like something that I did in terms of making friends, because at the time when I started making these videos, I was kind of in a lonely time in my life, because I was living in France. And I was an au pair, but I lived like in this little village, quite far out of Paris. And so I would go to Paris in the day. Yeah. But then once I'd put the kids to bed, I had a few hours to myself where like there was nothing to do in the village, basically. And it was too late to like get a train into Paris.
19.
Yeah. So I was just like, YouTube. And so that's what I did with my evenings. Yeah.
So when did it become something more than just a hobby? When did it become serious, in air quotes?
Yeah,
because we're on audio.
Yeah. Serious. I think so that I started when I was like on my gap year, basically, and then I kept doing it all the way through university, and it was probably in my like third year of uni that I started to get like small little jobs because of my YouTube. Yeah. Like different companies would be like, oh, can you make a video for us and we'll pay you? And I was like, interesting. Yeah. And so it was still like a part-time thing, and like I was getting my degree. But I was going to London quite often. Yeah.
Because you were in Manchester, weren't you?
I'm from Manchester, but I went to uni in Birmingham.
Okay.
So I've just done like the 3 major cities.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so it was still kind of like an on the side hobby, part-time job, kind of thing. And I was going to London constantly because of like either like events or social things that were happening. And then when I graduated, I was like, now is the time to take risks. Now is the time just to like go for it. And so I just like on a whim moved to London, got a part-time job, and just like hustled my way. Wow. And then 11 months later, it'd become my full-time job.
That's amazing. Yeah. And so how long has that been now that you've been full-time?
I went full-time in July 2015.
Okay.
So kind of like
almost 2 years.
Yeah, 2.5 years-ish. Yeah.
That's super exciting.
No, 1.5 years. Yeah.
1.5 years.
Almost.
Almost.
Yeah.
And when did your blog come about? Because that's obviously a lot later. You're very established on YouTube already. You've got a gazillion
million subscribers.
Gazillion.
Yeah, that is a technical term.
On YouTube it's like over 300,000.
It's crazy.
And then my blog, I've actually had like 3 reincarnations of my blog.
I thought you were going to say, I've actually had 3 readers.
3 people, 3 really dedicated people reading my blog. And so now my blog, the one that I use now, kind of started taking seriously at the beginning of last year. I basically had made it my New Year's resolution. So the year before, I'm trying to think. 2014.
Yeah.
My New Year's resolution was to write a blog, and so I started this blog. And
for fun,
and I would write on it every so often. I just wanted to kind of practice writing and have kind of another place to put thoughts, because the type of things that I would talk about in blogs and the way that I would talk about things is very different from what I would put on YouTube, and it's kind of like giving me more choice in terms of what I share online and how I share it.
Yeah.
And then from doing it just very ad hoc, just as and when I had an idea or wanted to write something that year, I was like, cool, I've managed to keep this up for a year, not regularly. And so 2016, I was like, okay, resolution, 1 blog post a week. And so I did that I think I managed it for 6 months.
That's really good going.
I was like, oh, especially because my blog makes me no money. I don't have ads on it or anything, and I don't do sponsored posts. So it's just purely a portfolio or just another kind of creative outlet for me.
Yeah.
And, but then what happened was, because of my book deal, I was writing my book all summer.
Yeah.
And so all of my writing energy went into the book and not the blog. And then I've kind of not touched it all that much since. I've done the odd blog post since then, but it's kind of a bit of it's more of a landing page at the moment. It's not something that I've completely given up on, but I feel like the more busy you get, you just have to prioritise, and the blog isn't a massive priority.
You've
for
got
me.
bigger fish to fry at the moment, hey?
Exactly, and especially because it's not a revenue income for me.
Yeah.
Maybe if I sorted out getting ads on it, then that might change.
Is that something you would even want to do though?
Probably. It's kind of ads are ads. People are used to seeing ads.
Yeah.
I don't feel like putting ads on my blog is selling out. Everyone does that.
Oh God, no, not at all. No.
But the thing is that I have no idea how to do that. So I'm just let's have it. I'm talking to my blogger friends, and they're just how do you YouTube? And I'm how do you blog? But yeah.
So in terms of YouTube then specifically, and monetizing it, and actually more of what I want to talk about is the arc that you go on, because I think almost every single blogger goes through this arc where they start creating, have a really, really good time, get into their groove, then suddenly start comparing themselves to other people, hit that sort of section where they're like, shit, I should be doing this, this and this. That person does it this way. Puts out content this many times a week or whatever. And then you come through that and you're like, okay, I give no fucks now. And that I think
you have to go through that period though. I feel
so.
To be able to come out the other side and be I give 0 fucks.
Yeah.
I think it's probably very similar with YouTube, especially because at least in the community in London, everyone socialises together as well and works together, and so everyone's so constantly in your face that it's almost impossible not to compare yourself. And you're not just comparing the type of content you make, how often you make it, but also the numbers, different strategies for marketing your content, who's got better thumbnails.
I don't even know what that means.
Just the picture of the video where you see just the thumbnail and the title and things like that, and who's got good aesthetic. That's one thing that I definitely struggle with in terms of comparing myself to other YouTubers and stuff, is their aesthetic. And it's not just on YouTube, it's people's Instagram feeds. I'm just I don't have an aesthetic. My aesthetic is just all over the place. It just doesn't, there's no cohesiveness to this. Whereas some people just have great aesthetics. I'm how do you do that?
Oh, that's funny that you say that. That is just That's the like big, I don't know, 21st century just marketing lie, isn't it? That the reality behind Instagram. But I never thought of it on YouTube. But actually thinking about it,
if you go to someone's page and you click on like videos, so all you see is just a grid of their videos, it's just so satisfying to see like themes in terms of like the font and colours and types of thumbnails and the topics that they're covering, whereas mine is just like a whole mess.
I feel like you have that though. You have a recognisable...
I feel like it's something that like everyone probably struggles with and thinks they don't have, and then if someone came to my channel, they're like, no, that I totally get it, and I'm like, but you know, we're all our own worst critics.
Absolutely.
Of that.
And comparison is the thief of joy.
Oh, it so
100%.
is. It so is. I'm still very young, and so I kind of give myself a lot of forgiveness when it comes to comparing myself, because I know that like I'm in my mid-20s. I think it's still very normal for me to be comparing myself to others. I feel like if I'm still feeling like this in 10 years' time, I'm going to be like, Hannah, come on.
Have a word with yourself.
Yeah, like you should not give a fuck at this point.
Yeah.
Because it's great. When I talk to my parents, they're just like, don't give a fuck what anyone thinks of me. My life is great. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, I can't wait to get there. That seems like such a happy place. But I also like, it's counterproductive to punish myself for feeling insecure about my work and things like that as well. So it's just kind of like, I'm just going to ride this wave, try and use that negative energy to motivate me maybe whilst
Do you find that is self-motivating then?
Sometimes it motivates me in a specific way where it's just like, so one of my friends who I'm very jealous of her aesthetic in terms of like the way that her videos look, in terms of like the colours and the colour correction and all of that. And so I was just asked her, I was like, what do you use? And then she like showed me this website where you can like buy presets of stuff, and so now I use that. Like I don't use exactly the one she used. I bought like one that more like suited me and one that I liked more. And so I guess that kind of like that jealousy,
you use it positively.
I was just like, oh, I'm gonna make a change here, and I want to make my videos look a bit more like just look nicer, and so I'm gonna use this. And like I do that often, like, where did you get that font? That's a great font. Or like it works in that way. And then sometimes it's one of those things where like the comparing yourself gets so bad and you're like so in this hole, and I find myself like looking up other people's statistics, and I'm like, Hannah, no, stop. And usually
because that must be so easy on YouTube. It's all there. You can see how many thumbs up, you can see how many...
There's that, but there's also like websites where you can search people's usernames and you can like actually see more behind the scenes stuff of like how many subscribers they gain each day, like what their projections are. And so it's just like...
I can imagine that's killer.
It is a downward spiral.
Yeah.
And usually when I get into that headspace, I have to like fully cut myself off.
Yeah.
And I have to like psych myself up and just be like, no, Hannah, you're just going to like, you're carving your own path.
Yeah.
You're going to go do your own thing, and don't worry about what everyone else is doing. If you focus on what you're doing, then what you make will be better for it.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
And so I have to kind of like, I do that, and then I steer off it, and I get distracted by what other people are doing, and then I have to like pull myself back.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And it is hard, I think it's even harder when you're younger, which sounds incredibly patronising, but I'm like almost 10 years older than you, I think. It is harder when you're younger, but to be honest, so like I don't think it really changes. I mean, I'm definitely not where your parents are, but I'm more probably that way. But when you're in you know, on social media all the time, God, it's so hard not to compare yourself.
Yeah.
But, horrible.
I think it's important to kind of like have a solid foundation of like a feeling of your own self-worth.
Yeah.
And really like be your own cheerleader and be your own hype man. So that when you do find yourself in that spiral of like scrolling through Instagram or like looking up other people's statistics, or, like, things like that, when you find yourself in that dark place, then you have like a good foundation to fall back on, which has only been built by you.
That is really, really good advice. And actually, it brings me on quite nicely to one of the topics that you cover, which I think this is actually how I sort of discovered you initially, was how honest and open you are about feminism and how much of a part of your brand, if you don't mind me calling you a brand, brand Witton.
Sure. Yeah, the Witton brand.
Yeah. Because obviously, anyone who, I mean, I'm not really your target audience, I wouldn't say.
Well, you'd be surprised, because my audience, you might be slightly older. I don't know how old you are, so I'm just like,
33.
Ooh, you could be. Like, my main audience is probably like 18 to 30-year-olds.
Okay.
So on YouTube, the main bulk of my audience are 18 to 24-year-olds, and the second biggest are the 25 to 34-year-olds.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. I feel a bit less bad then.
Yeah.
Because I watch your Hormone Diaries vlogs. So you talk a lot about feminism and also about sexuality and LGBTQ and God, some of the stuff that I've learned from your channel.
Yeah. I just need to do videos about pregnancy now and childbirth.
Yes, please do.
Yeah.
Maybe not childbirth. Do you want me to
be a guest? Oh my god, yeah.
I'll send you the raw footage.
My friend Lucy has volunteered.
So talking about feminism and also being a role model, what's that even
like?
Yeah.
It's an interesting one, because I feel like most of the people I know, and myself included, who I probably would consider role models, like, don't choose to be role models. Usually it's the people who are looking up to you, like, that you choose your own role models. So I might say Caitlin Moran is my role model, but like, she doesn't necessarily know that. She didn't choose to be my role model. I chose her. So it's always that way around. And so that's what I always have to think about. It's like, I've not chosen to be a role model. These people have chosen me, but then there's like, chosen me. That sounds really like arrogant.
No,
but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you kind of have to strike a balance between accepting the responsibility, because I'm very much an advocate for, like, if you have a platform, if there are people who will listen to you and you have somewhat of an influence, no matter how big it is, if it's 100 people listening to you or like 10 million people listening to you, then you have a responsibility to make the lives of those people better in whatever way that it is. And so I think, on the one hand, you have to do that. You have to accept the responsibility and really act upon it and really think about, what are my resources and what's my knowledge and what are my skills and where are they best placed in making the world a better place. And so I've always been very comfortable talking about sex and relationships and things like that. And so I was like, cool, this is something that I feel like I'd be good at and I can do. But then you also have to kind of take the other side of things and be like, your audience aren't entitled to anything. You don't have to necessarily always be this person that they think you are. But I would also add that you can be that person privately, maybe.
Right.
And it's about striking that balance and like being even though it may seem like I'm an oversharer, I am very careful and meticulous about what I share and what I don't share. Yeah. And if I ever say something online that's a bit of an overshare, a bit of a TMI, like, I know, and I carefully like thought about that and made a conscious decision to share that. Because it comes across in a certain way that I want to come across. And then there's other things where I'll like withhold information. So yeah, with being a role model, it's kind of like striking that balance between really doing your best job as a public figure, whilst also maintaining your own sanity and like being a person who like makes mistakes and can have their own private life and things like that.
You can definitely tell that you're careful with your power, as it were, because I've definitely seen, I think it might have been in a collaboration video that you did with somebody else, or it might have been Drunk Advice or something, where you, even though, you know, you're not hammered in these videos necessarily, but even though you'd had a drink, you added in something really, really important. And I think it was to do with maybe anal sex and making sure you use protection regardless. And I was like, wow, I'm really impressed that you've remembered. Actually,
I'm like, guys, always on
this is important. But it wasn't like po-faced or contrived or anything. And I was like, wow, that's really impressive that you've kind of remained.
With the drunk advice videos, the reason why they came about was kind of because of this whole like role model dilemma I was having, because people would come to me for advice, and I'm not
specifically about sex or about anything.
Often about sex and relationships, because that's kind of what I put out as being like knowledgeable in, but also anything like friendship, school, family, all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I wanted to help people, but also I knew that I couldn't answer every question. I know that I'm not an expert, like I'm not a doctor, I'm not a counsellor, psychologist. Like I'm not one of those people in terms of if you want to get formal help for things. But I'm definitely someone where you can get informal help from.
Yeah.
And I wanted to kind of strike this balance between helping people, but also not putting pressure on myself to give the right advice all of the time.
Yeah.
And so drunk advice to me was like this perfect way to kind of like have a good time with it, maybe give some bad advice, but actually a lot of the advice in drunk advice is good.
Yeah, I really like it.
But it's not too serious and boring. It's still kind of like if you were like having a few drinks with your friends and you're like, I need help with this thing, and you're like, okay, mate, I got this. Here's what you're gonna do. Because I think with drunk advice, it allows me a lot more wiggle room to maybe say things that I wouldn't necessarily get away with saying if I was sincerely giving someone advice.
Yeah. So some of the topics that you cover, we've obviously talked about on your YouTube channel, but in terms of your blog, there's a lot more, I suppose because it's more of a hobby blog at the moment, and it's... Well, not hobby blog, that sounds a bit condescending.
No, but I think it is.
Like it's more, like you're not confined, I suppose.
Yeah.
So you talk about lots and lots of other stuff, but travel was something that I wanted to talk to you about because...
That's how we met.
Yes, indeed. Obviously, you've done quite a lot with Trek America. Is that where the travel content started out? Or had you... always been covering travel?
I'd done travel content like since the beginning of doing videos, because obviously I was living in Paris, and so I did some like videos of being like, oh, Paris.
Yeah.
And then I would just vlog holidays and trips, like very casually, just kind of like as my own like home travel video style thing. I think, I might be wrong, but I think Trek America was like the first time I did a travel thing with a company. Yeah. And like had to produce content on that. And then since then I've done a few more things with different companies in terms of travel, which has been so great. But because travel's not like my main thing that I do, even though I'm like, one part of me is just like, travel all the time, Hannah. Just always be traveling. But then I'm like, but then I can't do all of these other things that I'm more invested in. And so with the travel stuff, I really have to kind of like pick and choose them quite wisely. And I can't really go on many like big trips if it's like 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah. Because then I'm like, I'm not going to be working. I'm out of work for 2 or 3 weeks. And I can only go on that trip if that company is going to like pay me. Yeah. So before it was like, oh, free trip. Great. And now it's more of a like, I need a fee on top of the free trip because I'm taking time out of doing
and because
other
you're
work.
Working as well. Because I think that's another arc. You've kind of led us really nicely to that. There's another arc that a lot of bloggers, influencers, whatever, Instagrammers, everyone goes on, is that working in exchange for something free that's awesome. Yeah. And then being like, actually, I need to be compensated for my time because I've got bills to pay. And in those 5 days, I'm not getting holiday pay. I'm not. And it's hard work as well. And I'm going to come back from that holiday and have all of my to-do list and then have to create all the content. Yeah.
Exactly.
What's
it
it like in the YouTube community in terms of, because I think there is quite a lot of judgment in blogging around that.
I think it's kind of very understood within the YouTube community in terms of people who are like working in it either full-time or part-time, that you need to be compensated for things.
Yeah.
And brands are definitely like on it. You do still get the odd email being like, do this for the experience or for exposure. But it's interesting because for me it's still very much case by case basis. If I'm being offered like a really cool experience, but they have no budget, but the experience itself is good enough, then sure, I'll do it, and I'll tweet and I'll Instagram about it.
Yeah.
And I think it's just about, it's about not being taken advantage of. So even if you are, say, that brand or company that have this amazing experience and you want to get influencers to come and do your experience thing, but you have no money to pay them, you need to be very clear about that, and you need to be very clear that you're not taking advantage of them at all, and there needs to be that kind of like that open dialogue and that understanding.
Yeah.
And
it's about knowing your own worth,
and the respect as well. I feel like if you get a sense that there is respect there, then you're more likely to say yes and feel like you're not being taken advantage of.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. I got a manager like 2 years ago, I think. And that was great for me because I hate asking for money.
Yeah.
And so
it's hard, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's
so
really
that's
unnatural.
something that like he does, which is fantastic. And so
does he deal with everything, including your book deal, which I do want to talk about as well.
Yeah,
Very
so
briefly.
he's kind of like got a kind of a role in the whole book stuff because he's my manager, so he kind of almost like manages everything I do, and he's very like big picture career, like where's all of this going, as well as working out like deal to deal YouTube stuff, and then also he has an assistant that manages my calendar. And
that's
so
nice.
Yeah, it's great because he has an assistant. She kind of like acts like my assistant.
Yeah, brilliant.
And I'm just like, okay. But then I also have a book agent.
Yes, okay.
Because my manager doesn't have the specific knowledge to deal with like the literary publishing industry. But they very much still kind of like work together. Yeah.
Where can everyone find you? And please do plug your amazing new book and your live shows.
Yes. So I am at Hannah Witton on Twitter and Instagram and social media. And
I'll link it all.
Yeah, and my YouTube is Hannah Witton as well, so youtube.com/Hannah Witton. My blog is hannahwitton.com. If you want to, maybe now we've talked about it, maybe I'll be like, I'm going to write a blog post.
Yes,
and my book is called Doing It, and it should be out now by the time this podcast is out.
Absolutely,
it's mental. And then the week after the book comes out, I'm doing some live shows. I have no idea if this podcast is coming out after the live shows, but in case this podcast before, the live shows are London on the 11th of April.
It might be just before, but I'm going to link to everything.
Okay, cool, so I'm doing a live show with the book tour, basically, which I'm currently writing, and I've just realised, I'm like, oh my god, I'm writing and directing a staged show. Yeah, like, that's mental.
Amazing.
Like,
and
I'm like, how did I do this? I'm like, am I... Okay, I'm a stage writer and director now.
Yeah,
just like put all these things.
Thank you so much for being a part of it. I will link everything in the show notes. Thanks for listening to What She Said. And if you like this episode or any of the other episodes, please think about giving me a lovely rating on iTunes. I really appreciate it. If you want to connect with me, head over to my blog, wanderloose.com, or hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, or Pinterest, where I'm at wanderlooseblog.